Hey, what's up guys? So today we're going to be doing a functional components and hooks introduction in React. All you'll need for this as usual is Node.js, so let's get right into it. So the API that we're going to be using for this tutorial is a periodic table API. You can find it on GitHub, and if you want to see the raw data, it looks like this. And what we're basically going to be doing is going to create a search function for a user to look up an element, and they will get basically the information about that element displayed in its own page, and then they're going to be able to go back and search for a new element. So just figured I would get that out of the way, get you guys up to speed on what we're going to be making, and let's get started with coding. So as usual, we want to start this off with an npx create react app in the target directory. You can call it whatever you want. I just called it functional components tutorial, and this is going to just create our boilerplate React app. As you guys, I'm sure are aware if you've seen my past tutorials. And after that's done, we'll come back. Alright, so once that's done, we're going to want to run our first test, which is basically we're just going to clear everything out of app here. We're going to add an h1. It's going to say hello world. We're just going to make sure that our generated boilerplate is working. So once you've done that, just open that in the browser and we'll see how that looks in just a sec here. Alright, so once we can see that our boilerplate is running with no errors, we can start writing our own code. I like to do that as a habit just to make sure that there's nothing kind of messed up just from the npx. So anyway, first thing that we're going to do in our source folder is we're going to create a folder called components, and inside of that we're going to create a component called element.js. We're also going to create one that's called element form.js, and then we're going to go inside element. And inside element, what we're going to basically do is we're going to create the page that the element form is going to fetch. So the way we're going to do that, import React import React from React, but we're not only going to be doing that, we're going to be importing two hooks into this component. We're going to do useState and useEffect. And basically, useState is obviously, as you can probably guess, it's similar to just the regular state in class components, whereas useEffect is, I think the easiest way to compare it is thinking of it like component did mount, but like you can provide a callback for a particular thing that changes. So in our case, it's going to be the name of the element, and you'll see what I mean by that in just a second. So the first thing, const element, and that's going to take a prop called name, and that's going to be the name of the element that the user is going to put into the element form. So we're going to do an arrow function there. We're going to bring this down. And the way we're going to be implementing the useState hook is by doing const, and then you declare an array. Oh, sorry, excuse me. And you use state, and we can declare that to an empty object for now. And then inside of the array we just made, we're going to just define info and set info. And these are basically, this is your state variable, and then this is the function to change state. So you can think of it as like this dot set state as what this is. If this is a class component, and then this is like the actual state. So after you do that, what we want to do is use effect, and then inside of that we're going to call an anonymous function. Oh, inside of that we're going to call an anonymous function, and inside of or after that we're going to use a callback so that if the name changes, then it's going to re-render. And if you left this blank, it would do the same thing in our case, but it was giving me a warning in the console for doing it blank. If you do it blank like that, it's literally the same as component did mount. It basically just runs once when the thing, and if you don't add anything here, then it'll just do it on an infinite loop. So we're just going to do name inside of there, and then we're going to do fetch, and we're going to make the API call. I'm just going to paste this in here real quick so I don't have to type this all out. Because if you've seen my other tutorials, hopefully you've understood how fetch works at this point. So we're going to be fetching from this API that I just showed you. We're going to be finding the atomic name parameter, and we're going to set it equal to the prop that gets passed in. And then we're basically going to set the empty object in our state or our info to the data received from the API call. And then after that, what we want to do is we're going to return the element. So we're just writing some JSX in here. We're going to do div class name equals element wrapper. Under that, we're going to do h1, and we're going to do info symbol. It's going to be a ternary operator, so it's a shorthand if statement, essentially, if you're unfamiliar with them. So what's basically going to happen is after you ask for a condition, so in our case it's going to be if inside of the state there is a symbol for the element, we're going to return info.symbol, and if there's not, we're going to return loading symbol. And then we're going to close that off. And the next one, we're going to do h2, and we're going to do atomic number, and then we're going to do info.atomic number. Same thing with the ternary operator, info.atomic number, loading, and then you can close that off. And we're going to do an h3, we're going to put the name, and this is just going to be the prop that's passed in. And then we're going to keep going down. We're going to do atomic mass. And I'm going to actually just paste the rest of this in real quick just because it's kind of redundant once you get the concept of how each thing that we're going to be fetching, each object from the database based on this prop is going to have a property called info dot and then all these things. So under atomic mass, I'm just going to paste that in, and then we'll fill out the atomic mass. So info dot atomic mass, info dot atomic mass, loading. Alright, so now that our element is done, we need to make our form, which is going to be used to basically find out what individual element we're going to want to be using. So inside of element form, we're going to do the same thing, import React, and then we're just going to be using the useState hook here, and then from React, and then we're going to import the thing we just made, element, from element, and then we're going to just make the object. So const element form equals, and then we're going to arrow function, and then we're going to basically do the set state again. So const element set element equals useState. We're going to set it to null at first, and then after that we're going to do const get element, and this is going to be a function with a parameter e. We're going to do e prevent default because this is going to be attached to our form. So whenever you have a form in React, you want to run the prevent default so that the page doesn't refresh, and then you can actually do like the client-side rendering. Forgot to add the equals there. So we'll continue for there. We're going to do let L, and the reason we're not going to say element is just because it gets kind of janky if your state is the same as a temporary variable name. So we're going to do e dot target dot value, target dot element dot value, sorry, and then we're going to do set element is L, and then under that we're going to do const clear data. We're going to do another anonymous function. Oop. We're going to do set element to null, and this is going to basically just reset our state to being null after if there's data in it, or after the user presses the button in our case for finding a new element. And then we're going to do let return data, and we're going to set that to nothing at first, and then inside of our return statement down here we're going to do div class name equals container. We're going to do h1 find an element. We're going to line break this too just for aesthetic purposes. Oops. Okay, and then under that we're going to do our return data basically, and what this is going to do is allow us to render conditional data. So in our return data, if element null, and this is our state variable, so it starts off null. So if it's null, what we want to happen is inside of here, so we'll just do a comment real quick just so it's a little clearer if it's confusing. So initial render is going to be element equals null, as we can see up here, and then we're going to do under here, it's going to be after the user submits the form, and then this is what's going to happen is under here. So in the initial render, what we're going to want to do is a form, and then on submit for that form, we're going to do get element, which is what we just defined up here. And that's where we're going to be using the e variable from the input, and we're going to be calling the function up here set element to that element, and then it's going to get passed into here. We'll see that in a second, so I don't want to get too far ahead. So on submit get element, we're going to declare an input, name equals element, type equals text, ID equals element, and the placeholder is going to be enter an element. Oh, element spelling is hard. Okay, so after that, we're going to do another line break, and then we're going to do a button, and this is just going to basically submit this form. So we're going to just do get element info, and then basically inside of the else statement, so once they have an element, we're going to do return data. Oh, I forgot to actually do that. Return data. Oh, return data equals, and then so same thing down here. Return data equals, and since we're going to be changing the value of return data, it basically means that the data here in our element is going to change, because we're going to be using element form as a root element here. So I might as well do that now. Element form. I gotta import that. So import element form from components element form. And then so our root container is basically going to, getting a warning here, might as well just delete that. Okay, so we're importing our element form here, and then over here, conditionally, we're rendering either an individual element or a form to choose an element. So inside return data for here, we're going to do a div. We're going to do element name equals element. And we're getting this from our state up here. So element is going to be the prop into the element object. And then we're going to do a line break, and then a button on click is going to be clear data, which is what we defined up here. So we're going to just label that button find a different element. All right. Oh, we forgot to export it. So you want to do what is it? It's a export default element, and then same thing in form. Export default element form. Save those, and we'll see how that looks in just a sec here. Alright, so back in the browser, we can see we have the header find an element and enter an element. And if we just pick an element, let's say mercury, we can press get element info, and you can see for a split second, oh, mercury, you can see for a split second that it'll say the loading, and then once the data is done loading, it'll appear. So what we're going to be doing next is just adding some style to this and making it look nice. So we're going to want to go into our app.css, and then we're going to want to delete everything except app. I'm going to keep that. And then based on our classes that we defined earlier, we're just going to start setting those. So .container form, padding 1 rem. We're going to do .element wrapper, margin 1 rem, and we're going to do a border of 5 pixels and solid black. And we're going to do an input, padding 0.5 rem, and an input focus, border 1 pixel, solid blue. And input focus basically is just when the user is using the element, or the input rather. And then we're going to do box shadow 0 0. Oh, my 0 button on my keyboard is not. It's seen better days, to say the least. And we're going to do RGBA 0 0 0. And then we're going to set it to 0.5 opacity. And then for our button, we're going to do margin top of 10 pixels, padding of 1 rem, a border of none, and a border, oh my, border radius of 3 pixels. And the final thing we're going to do is button hover. And we're going to do transition duration, it's 500 milliseconds. The background color is going to be equal to RGBA. And the difference between RGB and RGBA is it just lets you set the opacity. So we're going to do 255, 0, oh, 0, 0, and 0.5. And this is going to give us a nice little kind of faded red, even though I have an extra 0 in there. So you're going to want to not do that. And now we're going to see what this looks like. So if we go find a different element, we can see now that our button has this nice little hover effect. And if we want to look for like platinum, we can do get element info, and it'll all come up. If we do find a different element, let's do copper, get element info. And yeah, that's basically how you do some basic functional components in React and how you use the useState and the useEffect hook. So if you enjoyed this tutorial, be sure to subscribe and be on the lookout for future videos.